Hello everyone. I hope we're ready to have some fun today. We're going to be designing an app, albeit a tad bit faster than what's done in the real world. But hopefully you can use what you learned today, practice, improve on it, and maybe one day I'll be downloading your app from the App Store. Let's get started. The big question for the day is, what are we going to be doing today? Well, first off, there's no coding involved. A big part of the software process does not involve coding. Kind of like in the movie business. They have to get the script and the sets and the actors and build models and 1,000 other things all before they make the movie. And after they make the movie, there's probably a ton of other steps too. Before coding an app, focus on the brainstorming, planning, and prototyping. That's what we're going to be doing. Think of architects. They don't start building a house, they brainstorm ideas, plan it out, build a small model or prototype, all before the house building process starts. Remember the prototype in the Die Hard movie, Die Hard 1. It was a prototype, I think, of a bridge, possibly. That's what we're kind of doing here today. That was a prototype of a real bridge, and we're going to be making a prototype of the real app, except we won't be blowing up our prototype. Okay, so we have two presentations for you today. This will be a brief presentation based on the brainstorm, plan, and prototype steps of app development. Instead of the evaluation phase, though, the judges will be evaluating and the finalists will get to present their prototypes to everyone. Hopefully, I won't ramble for too long. I'll try to make it quick since you should all have access to this PowerPoint. Feel free to download it and review it. The second presentation will actually show you how to build a prototype, the main part of what you'll be doing today. So let's get started. We're going to be working on brainstorming. Obviously, we can't just start writing the app. We have to first decide what kind of app we want to create. When brainstorming, write down as many ideas, notes, and sketches that you can think of. Everyone on the team should get involved. There are no wrong ideas. You never know what may inspire new ideas. For example, purple grapes might make you think of your childhood purple friend, which in turn makes you think of your childhood, which in turn makes you think of those beautiful beach vacations you took. And then maybe that'll inspire you to think about beach cleaning or something to do with the environment, or so many things can come from that. So just write down as much as you can. Think about our topic today. What do you know about the challenge? What questions do you need to find answers to? Think of some of the apps you use. What makes them good? What do you like about them? Then brainstorm a list of apps you'd like to build. Are there competitors out there? And if so, what is being said about those apps? A main question to ask yourself is if your app is appropriate for its intended audience. Is this for kids, adults, athletes, students, people in Texas? Always keep in mind your target audience. For example, this purple dinosaur might be more appropriate for a kids app, but not so much for maybe the Natural History Museum's app on their new dinosaur exhibit. Hopefully, at the end of the brainstorming, you'll have a plethora of apps to choose from that could bring you millions of dollars. You probably won't be able to decide which app to work on, but you must select one idea and develop it further. And now that brings us to the planning stage. Now that you've brainstormed and come up with one idea, this is when you figure out the details of your app. That's the planning stage. The 4 key areas are empathy, UI/UX, iOS features, and design. Those are the 4 key areas of the planning stage. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. In this case, it translates to thinking about how your audience will use the app. Who are we creating this for? Try to imagine the app through their eyes. First and foremost, an app should be easy to use. That's where UI UX comes in. Many of you have probably heard that term before, but what is it? UI stands for user interface. How does it look? Colors, buttons, all the things you see and interact with. UX stands for the user experience. Now think of your favorite apps. Write down reasons that some are easier to use. Did you all agree? Alright, so now you get to think of the different iOS features you may want to incorporate into your app. I'm not going to go over all of them in detail, but feel free to review this list in further detail and to even Google and search for other features. Some examples are, will you need the user to use the keyboard, the camera, the touch screen? What about Wi-Fi? Not all apps require Wi-Fi. My favorite Bubble Pop app doesn't need it, and I still find it completely entertaining and a great waste of time. Or how about GPS, Bluetooth? You can even get fancy and detect whether a device is accelerating or decelerating. Maybe use speech recognition, machine learning, augmented reality. The list goes on. Accessibility is also very important. You may need to make sure fonts can be resized or series available for users with physical or visual impairments. The next two screens encourage you to list all the different features and try to figure out what you want to include. Or more importantly, what you need to include. You want your app to be unique, but you also want it to be simple and easy to use. Spend some time mapping it out. Lastly, work on design. Give your app personality and style, but keep it simple and consistent. Keep the color scheme and fonts consistent, and don't go overboard with sounds and unnecessary images like I've done today. You can even design a few different icons for your app. Of course, you might not have time for this today, or maybe one person on the team can work on it, but these are all things to think about. Today is going to be a marathon of a day, and you may not have a lot of time to spend on all these items, but the most important thing is that you want to take a little bit of time to brainstorm and plan it out. It'll make things go so much smoother. That brings us to the last main step, prototyping. What are you going to be creating today? You may want to take some notes on this. Basically, you're developing a presentation, kind of like this, but you'll be using Google Slides. And the first part of your presentation, of course, will be to introduce your team and will contain a description or introduction of your app, what you're creating, how you're creating it, why you're creating it. The second part of that same presentation will be a storyboard. If you've ever watched Elf, they made storyboards of the books. So we'll touch on that later in this presentation. Part 3 is again in the same presentation is to build the prototype, which we'll discuss in this presentation and in the next. As per Apple, their definition of the prototype phase is to ask yourself, what do the main screens of your app look like? So the first thing to do is to go old school, like in the good old days, way back. Get some paper and pen and a pencil and sketch out your screens. You can even get fancy and use some markers. Draw out the screens of your app. You're not going to be showing it to us or to anyone else. It's just to lay it out and get some ideas. What you see here is an example of nothing really, but it's here to show you that it doesn't have to be fancy. And don't forget, always keep your design in mind. The design elements, the navigation, the interface, and remember, keep it simple and consistent. Here's the fun part. Once you draw it all out on paper and pen and pencil, you're going to be ready to create the screens in Google Slides. You can use PowerPoint or Keynote, even Xcode, and there's so many other tools out there specifically for prototyping. However, most of us will be using Google Slides, and it's a great tool to use when collaborating with others. Now, I'll have another presentation that will help you or show you how to create some of the aspects of your prototype. But what you'll basically be doing is designing the screens you drew out in Google Slides using the shapes, text boxes, colors, fills, all those little tools that are in the app. We're going to be using a Let's Vote app here that we designed as an example to show how we can create a prototype. Okay, so now once you've drawn out your screens in Google Slides, and for no other reason but just to get them all done, we're going to put it all together in a storyboard. The first part of the prototype, well, the first part of your presentation, remember, was the description. Okay? And so now we're in the next part, which is a storyboard, which is kind of two parts. Most people call this the storyboard, which is the pictures of the screen and arrows that show where one screen leads into another. It shows the navigation paths. It doesn't all have to fit on one screen. It can take up more than one screen. And then the next step of the prototype storyboard is to create a detailed description of each screen. Be as detailed as you can, though I know this is an area you might not have a lot of time for. At a minimum, what's the purpose of the screen? When do features become available? What happens when the user taps how or what or who? If you've taken programming classes and are familiar with if statements, map out some of the conditional statements, like if a user taps yes, it does this, or else it does this. I'm not going to go through all these, and you definitely won't have time to go into this much detail, but it's good to get an idea of what you could do. For example, our main screen has, at a minimum, a summary of the screen. And then it goes on to give you a lot of other details. This was just to give you an idea of what you could do. Like you could talk about that's just a table with 4 rows. The first row has an image. The buttons are, I think, maybe purple, light purple. The text is dark gray. I mean, you could go into a ton of detail. But at a minimum, at least include the summary. The next few slides all have descriptions of the slides in our fake Let's Go Vote app. And you can take a look and you can get ideas of what other descriptions could be included. And then that brings us to the build phase. This is what may take you the most time. It's fun. It's called Fake It Until You Make It. Basically, you're making a fake app until you get started on creating your real app. And you will create this fake app as part of this presentation using Google Slide features. As previously mentioned, you can use any tool, but again, we're going to be focusing on Google Slides. So, now that everyone is completely confused, what are we going to be doing today? All right, basically, we're going to be creating a presentation. Okay, you'll be creating a presentation using Google Slides. First part of the presentation is the description, introduction, history of your app. Well, actually, the first part is the introduction of all of y'all. And then it's the description, the introduction, the history of your app. Include the what's, the why's, and the how's. Don't forget that. What it'll do, why you chose it, how it works. It may take more than one screen. That's part 1, or step 1. Then you're going to be creating screens using your Google Slide elements, like text boxes, images, shapes. And once you have the screens done, it's easier to get them all done. You can do the second part, step 2, which is the storyboard, the navigation part where you lay them all out and you use arrows to show the different navigation paths. The next step of the storyboard, step 3, is still part of the storyboard, but it's to create a detailed layout of each screen. How each screen is designed and its functions. This should be easy since you already have the screens and you're just going to be copying them 1 per slide. And you can do step 2 and step 3 you can switch the order, do the layout of each screen, and then do the storyboard. And lastly, the 4th step is the build. So that is what you're going to be doing today, a presentation with a description, a storyboard layout part with the navigation paths, the storyboard part of the detailed layout of each step, and then the build. And then the last part is the evaluation, but the judges will be evaluating it, and there'll be presentations of the different apps. So the most important thing is to have fun today, and good luck.